Hello and welcome to World Cities, the Toronto stage. My name is AGATHA Podgorski. I'm the Director of Marketing at the Culinary Tourism Alliance. I'm joined today by two of my favorite people in Toronto's restaurant industry. We've got Max MEIGHEN, owner and founder of Aveling, and we've got TREVOR LUI, chef, author, entrepreneur, jack of all trades, literally. This is exciting. I'm excited to talk to you guys today about Toronto and what makes it so special. So the last 18 months, they've been a little weird, right? Tell me about that. What was it like for you?
Well, fortunately enough, Aveling, we are a restaurant. We've got a rooftop farm, but we're also a brewery. So people in our neighborhood were used to coming down to our restaurant to pick up beer, and so adding takeaway food, frozen meals, meal boxes. It wasn't too difficult, but nevertheless, we were never designed to be a takeout restaurant. We were never designed to operate this way. So even though it was successful, the scale of our operation, the size of our building, the fixed costs, it's been very difficult, but certainly learned quite a bit.
Yeah, I can imagine. Trevor, what about you? What were the last 18 months like for you?
Well, you grow up thinking about when you say, what do I want to be when I grow up? I think it wasn't until the pandemic hit that I realized what we needed to become. And the business essentially changed 180. We closed a couple of our original concept restaurants at Stack Market, which is a container market. And we shuttered essentially all our live events on our live event wing, which was catering and trading consumer shows and experiences, since there were no more live events. So in the 18 months, we had to find a way to, number one, keep our staff working, even though revenue wasn't coming in and we weren't having any diners in-house. So we launched a new brand last year, which has actually done quite well. And then we also launched an agency around diversity, equity, and inclusion in the hospitality space. And now we're getting back to live events slowly. So it's been a very long 18 months. I didn't think we were going to make it through, but I'm happy to say that there's a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel, but we had to make a lot of changes, including releasing a cookbook and a whole line of other retail goods to help us going. So
it sounds like the industry was in a bit of chaos for the last 18 months. Everything was changing. No one really knew what to do. There was support, there wasn't support. What does that look like? I think there was a bit of a silver lining, though, that happened throughout the course of the last 18 months. And there was this kind of call to arms for the industry to change, to be better, and for things in Toronto to be what they could be. Do you think that's true? Did you see any of that with your peers or at your business?
well, I always say that Toronto, for one thing, has a little bit of an imposter syndrome, that we don't love ourselves as much as we should, considering how talented a network we have, particularly around food and beverage. And I think the pandemic has created this reason for consumers to be more hyper-local and try out things that maybe wasn't on their radar before, because a lot of us were forced to create products that weren't in our wheelhouse, which included specialty pop-up meals or gifting and all these things. And I think it's really helped, number one, our consumers broaden their knowledge of what's available in the city. The other one was for us as an industry to have a lot more back channel discussions, which we did over the last year, because we were one of the industries that were hit the hardest.
Mm-hmm. I think innovation is a big thread there. Like people, I mean, we hate the word pivot right now. Everybody does, but I think that was a cornerstone of what was going on. Essentially, people had to change overnight, every week, right? Which I think led to a lot of really cool partnerships and conversations. What about you, Max?
Yeah, I mean, I similarly have kind of become a little allergic to the term pivot, but it was a reality. I think, as Trevor spoke to, the city really showed up in a major way. It was sort of an embracing of what Toronto had to offer, and understanding that everyone was sort of figuring this out together at the same time, and that there were going to be mistakes made. But I think a lot of people came across some unexpected new possibilities, and kind of were forced to grow up very quickly.
I like that term, grow up very quickly, because I think we've felt kind of like the kid sister to a lot of major cities for a long time, and suddenly we're here, we're showing up, we're doing some really cool stuff.
Yeah, and I think on the flip side of that as well, obviously there were other things that happened in the world, other major shifts besides just the pandemic. And while I was really encouraged by the support and by the sort of collective action that Toronto diners showed towards the restaurant industry, I was also really encouraged and heartened to see them simultaneously kind of expect and demand the change that not only needs to happen more broadly, but really needs to happen within the restaurant industry.
When you say change in the restaurant industry, what do you guys think needs to change?
Listen, if there's anything that happened, the pandemic really exposed the vulnerabilities and the weaknesses that our industry lived on for years. And that was labor force, supply chain, how we treated our staff, the role of BIPOC, the role of women in our kitchens. I mean, that'd been suppressed for many years. I think, and a lot of people knew that, that needed to be fixed. A lot of times innovation doesn't happen until you're forced. Our agency—
Until there's crisis, right?
And crisis. And listen, our agency, that was started because of not only timing, but personal lived experience. It all just happened all at the same time, right? And it gave us a way to look at food and the hospitality industry from a completely different lens. And I wouldn't say we were ever on the outside looking in. We were just on the inside in a box, not knowing that we were part of this system that needed to be broken down.
It's a good segue. Tell me about Quell and why it's necessary right now.
It really started off as, number one, being someone that was doing a lot of work that I felt that I needed the proper representation. I didn't think I had it for the last while. And then I looked around and looked at my colleagues. We call ourselves a safe, connected network of people that have been underrepresented for a long time, particularly when I look at what the fabric of hospitality, food and beverage should look like as an extension of our population. And it really hasn't been for the longest time. So it started off as a talent agency. When we first sat down, my sister and I, Stephanie, spent 3 months writing on a business plan. We didn't think that we'd go beyond talent agency, but really quickly after that, it became businesses that needed help with diversity, equity, and inclusion in their foundation of their business. And that's our fastest growing angle now. And our talent agency has become an extension of people that are educated and are leaders in certain angles of food and hospitality that help us deliver programs for our clients now.
Do you think there's something unique about the Toronto ecosystem, our community here, that made it possible for a business like yours to exist and thrive, especially during a pandemic?
I think there's a yes and a no, because the yes would be there's a whole side of this Toronto that's super multicultural and super innovative. But what I realized in this last year is there's also a part of the city that still has a lot to learn and a lot of growing up to do. And that's why it's been able to exist and happen so fast, because as much as we've been accepted, there are businesses and there are people who need our service.
100%. It feels like that openness, though, to have that conversation and have it take such center stage is one of the beautiful things about a city like Toronto, that makes it easier is the wrong word, different, I think, to live that experience and to have a business like that here.
It's funny because I'd never met Max until we had our pre-call. And I remember the email coming through and I saw the name Aveling. I'm like, I know this brewery. And then I called my sister. Actually, I texted my sister the word Aveling. She's like, why, what's up? What's wrong with Eva? Well, little do we know that Eva Chin, who is one of the amazing chefs that we represent, is a chef that you guys hired. And we already knew amazing stuff about Aveling. We were so fond of you guys as a business. And when we heard there's this marriage, so it's serendipitous in a way. I mean, this alone is almost the epitome of what this year has been about.
For sure, which is a great segue. Max, tell me about Aveling and why a business as cool, innovative, and like boundary pushing as Aveling can exist? Like, tell me about your brewery and this city.
That's a great question. You know, in sort of the most humble terms possible, I don't really think of it as how can it exist. I sort of have always considered it as to how could it exist in any other form. And what I mean by that is looking at the restaurant industry and thinking about the challenges that Trevor touched on earlier about labor force, labor shortage, wages, career development, all these issues that have kind of been endemic to the restaurant industry for decades. I mean, the change, it's on the horizon, it's coming fast, and so how I sort of conceived of Aveling was really a business that embodied the concepts of circularity in as many ways as possible. And so what that means, at least for us on site, is between the rooftop garden, the restaurant, and the brewery, we're constantly looking to create inputs out of other departments' outputs. So brewery wastewater is used for irrigation on the roof. Obviously, the roof produces products for both the restaurant, the bar menu, and the brewery. Our unsold bread is frozen, and once we have enough, that ends up going into a beer. Beyond just the products and the sort of the surface level sustainability, bringing it back to staff, it has allowed us to take people who may have considered serving or cooking as a stopgap, as a temporary employment until they find something better or move on to what they really want to do. We've been able to direct people into all kinds of different channels and engage the sort of the full person. And that's meant that we've had better retention, and I think people feel more engaged to come and work. So as I say, I think from my perspective, it really wasn't about how can we balance all this. It's how can we make sure that we are putting forward a product and an environment that not only speaks to our guests' expectation in this day and age, but also our staff's expectations and our staff's needs, because for the longest time, the restaurant industry has just ignored that.
For sure. I mean, I love that everything in your business model is approached with this lane of sustainability, and not just environmental sustainability, but the holistic idea of sustainability, both taking care of people and your community and everything in between. Do you think there's something unique about this city that has made a business like yours possible?
There's a few things, maybe some kind of elements that have certainly helped us. Toronto has had, for a long time now, very generous green roof rebate program, which means that if you install a green roof, you get quite a bit of money back from the city for the cost of installation. So
I mean, your roof isn't just green; like, it's producing food.
Well, no,
large amounts of
absolutely.
food. It's a food roof.
And this is less of what made us possible, but I think what is really a real opportunity for the city of Toronto is that there are already hundreds, if not thousands, of green roofs across the city that have been installed due to the development mandates as well as these rebates. And you know, they're in various states of disrepair, and they require maintenance, and they're sort of seen as this sort of add-on that has now been mandated. But I think if we flip our perspective and take these green roofs and make them productive, or at the very least make them amenity spaces, then all of a sudden you know, our urban environment becomes not only a lot more livable, but you're connecting people with food, and you go from, instead of having a maintenance cost on your building, you have an actual asset that either can generate income for you, or at the very least can be an attractive offering to prospective tenants or residents.
Yeah, I like this idea that there are programs and systems in place here that connect people to food more than just the status quo, whether that's sustainability, green roofs, or community programming, cultural programming, whatever that may be. What about you, Trevor? Do you have any thoughts on the city landscape right now?
Well, we're very lucky. We reside at Stack Market, which is 200,000 square feet of designated city parkland, which is being used as a mixed commercial community hub composed of old shipping containers. And so
It is cool.
We have a mix
let's
of
not underscore
we
that.
have
It
a
is
mix
cool.
of outdoor patio greenery space. We provide a large component of the food there with our partnership of a fried chicken concept, as well as live event catering. But there's also retail shops and community programming every week. So we have a laneway where we do community, we call it community alley, where in the community lane when we have markets. So it's local artisan markets where we support. We recently had Black Foodie Week, we had the Asian Night Market, we had the Indigenous Market. And so we also have a program, the Bowery Project, which does urban landscaping and growing. And all the herbs are sent back into the community, the funds raised. It's a 360 there. So we're very lucky to be part of something that's nestled literally. You can see the CN Tower right from our front entrance, right? So innovation like that allows the city to sort of be a canvas for more. When you walk by and you see what we do at Aveling and what we do at Stack, then you take a look and see, well, why can't we replicate this in every area of our city and across the country and across the world? So,
yeah, and it's funny when I think about it, because everyone always thinks Canada and Toronto is so cold, right? Like you have outdoor things, but it's so cold. But I think in a way that has forced us to become really creative with our outdoor spaces and really kind of appreciate them when we have access to them. The outdoor stuff that happens in winter, whether it's like under the Bentway or in Stacked or, fire pits and light shows and cool stuff like that. Like, I think that's one of the ways we really excel right now, is creating these community outdoor spaces where people can connect with each other, with food, with businesses like yours. I think it's pretty magical.
if there are two things that Torontonians are really good at, it's patioing and brunching.
Yeah.
So I mean, those
brunching on a patio.
or brunching
like,
on a patio.
Yeah.
So like, you think about things that were almost pandemic proof, like patioing and brunching on a patio was perfect, right? So
Yeah.
and Toronto got that down. So we're just innovating more now.
For sure. In the brunch space, we're gonna have some, like, what's the next step for a poached egg, guys? It's gonna be like freeze-dried egg. Anyway, that went in a weird direction. So I'm gonna ask you guys a big question, and I don't expect you to have the answers to this, but what do you think the future of dining looks like in a city like Toronto?
I think we're already partially there. Certainly, we've seen the growth of, bodegas and mercados existing inside a traditional restaurant space. Most restaurateurs are not going to get rid of those because they're now a secondary stream of revenue. It may even be better from a net profit perspective. It may be better than your dine-in, right? The other one, the growth of subscription-based food, I think that's going to grow, particularly with our younger generation. The one thing that I see growing rapidly.
Sorry, when you say subscription-based food, what do you mean by that?
You can pay a monthly fee for a certain type of food to come shipped to you monthly or weekly.
Like
but it
restaurant
changes.
food?
Yeah, restaurant food.
Cool.
It could be you could have an Italian restaurant subscription where 1 month it's carbonara and it's every Friday, and then another month it's an Aperol spritz with cacio e pepe. And I know you guys are probably working on that as well. So
I could deal with a
there-
weekly
there's
carbonara.
There's a pizza subscription out there, right, where you get pizza every month.
Right.
But the biggest thing for me, I think that's going to change is going to be in the tech space, particularly with service. I don't think we're going to cure our labor shortage anytime soon. I don't think people wake up anymore and say, I'm going to be a server, or I'm going to be a cook. It's very transient. We've seen that this year, that it's tough to get people, let alone keep people. So I think we're going to see a lot of applications that we've seen for at-home delivery sort of make the bridge over to the restaurant space where customers can take control of ordering a little bit more, because we just don't have enough staff anymore. And I'll be honest, when you get staff, it's tough to train them to the level where you want to get them to and then actually keep them to. So I see a couple things out there where customers are going to get a little more control about ordering on their own, and all we're doing is firing and delivering the food and checking in on them.
Do you think that's going to create opportunities for more restaurant, more dining, more culture, or do you think that's going to be a roadblock?
I think this is going to be a fabric of what the consumer wants. And if you take a look at some of the studies, particularly studies that were done at National Restaurant Association, one of them was they asked people, would you prefer to be served on or would you prefer to take control of it? And I believe the number was over 70% overwhelmingly that people would prefer. Now that's not for every model. There's still a space for fine dining and the dining experience, which I love, but if you go out 2-3 times a week, you may have a different setting in each one. Kind of like when you're at VIP theaters or at the ball game, I don't mind getting in-seat dining if I could just do it off my phone and someone just delivers it to me because I don't want to get up and go get it. So I think it's a balance, but I think it's going to be consumer driven for sure.
I'm excited to see this, and I hope it just doesn't turn into robot servers, because that to me would be weird.
I agree.
Max, what about you? What do you think the future of dining in Toronto looks like?
For me, I sort of consider it more, as we do with most things at Aveling, sort of taking things right back to the field and even back to the seed. I see increasingly sort of policy-driven mandates towards circularity, the circular economy, and locality. So I'm really hoping that we'll see an increased engagement with a broader number of smaller local farms. We've seen, at least even during the pandemic, I know of 2 or 3 cloud-based aggregate markets that are serving the small-scale agriculture industry in the surrounding areas around Toronto. So the infrastructure around getting that food to restaurants and to consumers is really starting to develop, and I think that's going to make market gardening and small-scale farming more viable, which is a huge step towards decreasing biodiversity loss and maintaining farmland. And I think consumers, just as much as they're demanding the type of experience they want to have, they're also demanding the nature of the products themselves. And I think we're seeing that push towards an expectation of an authentic locality. I think maybe pre-pandemic, 5 years ago, eating local, it was good enough just to kind of go down to the end of the street and eat at your local restaurant. But the stress on supply chain and an ever-increasing awareness of health issues and drought and climate change is just, I think has pushed that idea of locality one step further. We're starting to see people, as I say, step up into the sort of tech and infrastructure space to make that easier. And I think for restaurants, it allows you to tell a more authentic story and separate yourself. So I hope that's the future that we see. I hope we see a more authentic and integrated connection with local agriculture, local producers, and what that means in terms of circularity. So, we send a lot of our brewers spent grain back to farms. In fact, we send all of it back to farms to be used as animal feed.
And then you get those animals back, and
absolutely.
They're fed real well.
Absolutely, and certain farms we work with the full rotation of crops that they grow. In a given field, one of our farmers will plant 1 year of corn, 1 year of peas, 1 year of grain, maybe something else, and back to corn. And 2, 3 out of the 5 of those are really primarily meant, those crops, are meant to be improve the soil and grow the soil. And we're finding ways in which to create novel income streams for these farmers to buy those cover crops, either use them in the kitchen or in the case of grains planted as cover, we're brewing with those to great success.
I love that you're thinking about this stuff, because when you think of cities, urban cities like Toronto, you don't often think of farming, but we're such a unique place when you compare us to other cities, because we're surrounded by this green belt of farmland, and it's so closely connected to the industry, but also our lifestyles here, right? Because we have this space that we have access to for, you know, recreation, but also growing food and keeping that top of mind in the industry. It's I think that's one of those unique things about Toronto. And when I think about our ravines and the green space and the reverence for that kind of activity and space, I think it's really important to our identity here as a city.
I would love to find a way for us to use this innovation as we talk about locality and agra to address, you know, how can we work with suppliers, producers, and the end users like the restaurants to potentially use this innovation and help tackle some of the issues that we still have, which is food insecurity, and creating community programming through innovation to show and educate parts of our communities that don't have access to some of this programming. And so if we were able to find ways to create a 360 with our food, wouldn't it be great if we shared that same knowledge to some of our underrepresented communities or underfunded communities to fix some of these issues? Because we still have, I mean, I'll be the first one as a restaurant owner myself. I see the waste that we go through, and it breaks my heart that we haven't found a way to take some of this waste or reduce the waste for the betterment of our communities.
For sure, and there's a lot of cool organizations starting those kinds of processes. When I think about Second Harvest or Food Share, which essentially reuse food, rescue food, and put it back into important communities. I mean, Food Share specifically has done wonders for the city, but I think the opportunities for the restaurant industry to get involved is where that magic's going to happen, and making sure that there are thought leaders in the space and in the industry that are actively engaged with solving those problems, because they're so interconnected.
One thing that I've considered and I think is an important shift that needs to happen for many reasons is looking at food insecurity and deciding and sort of declaring that those people who are food insecure, you know, they deserve more than kind of rescued food. I think it needs to go back to, you know, they deserve the raw ingredients, access to fresh, nutrient-dense, responsibly produced food. And you know, this isn't it's by no means a silver bullet, but going back to the idea of these sort of subscription boxes, we toyed with the idea of and had a small pilot project running during the pandemic of a farm box, sort of what's commonly known as a CSA box, a community supported agriculture. And it was a subscription-based model, so people would order, come to the restaurant, pick up their box that included products from our own roof. But a portion of the subscription price, and we broke all this out for people, went towards buying a surplus of products from these small, often always independent, but often sort of very new farms. And it allowed for, you know, more throughput for these farms, but it also, that surplus went directly to agencies and community groups in our neighborhood that needed that food. So instead of giving them or redirecting what we didn't need or what we weren't smart enough to use, you know, I think the tech space and again this sort of Internet of Things, this new approach, hopefully can help drive broader access and hopefully democratize good food.
Yeah, it's a.
Like you said, leadership, innovation, and the thought process. Because as much as these food rescue organizations are great, it'd be great if we didn't need them. And part of it is understanding that our system is a little backwards, right? We plan for someone to pick up leftover food, when the plan should be, let's plan to not have leftover food, right? So, and that's where we need the innovation and the leadership. We got to go back to the beginning and say, what's part of the system that's broken? Why are we making so much that we actually don't need? And then we're giving someone else's leftover food to someone, where Max says, we need to give people same access to everything that we're using, right? So,
yeah, and I mean, it's even kind of adjusting our expectations would go a long way to help solving that problem. We just at the restaurant, at the brewery, we just made 2 beers that used around 600 kilos of B-grade, 1,200 kilos of B-grade fruit, 600 of peaches, 600 of plums that, because of their aesthetics, would never see restaurant kitchens or supermarket shelves. They would have rotted in the orchards. So even a super simple shift in mentality or awareness would save untold amount of food. So
it's an interesting role that you play as a restaurant and a brewery. Do you think beverage purveyors have a different role to play than restaurants, whether it's in sustainability or whether it's in the industry as a whole and recovering?
I don't know about beverage manufacturers or beverage suppliers as a standalone, but certainly breweries, wineries, cider makers. I think in many ways, food is often divorced. In people's minds, food is divorced from its origins and how it's grown, how it's produced, and even more so, wine and beer. I mean, I think those are very opaque processes for a lot of people, and so at least for the craft beer industry, largely being located in urban areas, I think we have a real interesting opportunity to reconnect, at least one food product back to its agricultural origins. And we have a unique opportunity, given that we have this rooftop farm, to connect all the food back to its origin and really kind of put it in black and white for people. The roof really wasn't conceived of a way to save money on our ingredient costs. It was meant to be a community space. It was meant to be an education space. We use all the same techniques that the regenerative farms that we work with are using at scale. We're just doing it bed by bed on our small 450 square meter farm.
Nice. Wow, we went to a lot of different places and had a lot of different discussions in the last half an hour. Any final thoughts on Toronto and the restaurant industry and how we can differentiate ourselves on a global scale, or how people can learn from what's happened in Toronto over the last 18 months?
I always said that Toronto is probably one of the most underappreciated food cities in the world, definitely in the country, but in the world. I think our moment is actually coming really soon. Innovation like Max and Aveling is a perfect example of how much talent we have in the city and how much programming and how much of a leading thought process exists in the city. I think we're just laying the groundwork for the last 40, 50 years of what we'll be doing in food. It's going to change tremendously, I think, in the next couple of years. But I think there are some big things that the world is going to pop up and say, wow, I can't believe that's coming out of Toronto, but we got to go visit. So,
nice.
Yeah, and from my perspective, I think this was certainly a growing trend, but the pandemic has just accelerated, is at least within Toronto, people really demanding and expecting better use of their public space. And I think Trevor with his community alley is a perfect example of how public space can be and really needs to be mobilized for the greater good and for education, engagement, community, a sense of place, a sense of belonging. And I hope that not only Torontonians but sort of urban dwellers everywhere will continue throughout the pandemic to want their public space to be used in this way, demand it, and we can only hope to see more good things like Stack Market and what Trevor's doing.
Amazing. You guys have been an absolute pleasure to talk to. Thank you so much. And thank you for joining us at World Cities on the Toronto stage, and enjoy the rest of the Toronto programming.